we ready? Shall we begin, or do you think we should wait till 5:30? We should start. Yes. Okay, let's begin. Or let's not begin. Let's look all these over so that people can feel. There we go. And then this one here. Okay. Again, keep reminding you, there's the AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council, AHRC award. That is for going to your PhD. The date of, I think the date of delivery of your application is the 9th of January or something like that, but believe me, you have to have it in way before then. So come talk to me in the next week or so. Those of you that are interested in doing that. Hello, that is a great hat.
From the market, I got it about 2 years ago.
Wow. Is there a chair there? Just, can you bring some chairs then?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Also, does anybody know what's happened to my chair? The one that was outside? Do you have it?
No, I don't, but I saw someone with it.
And did they leave the building with it?
No. It's in
Okay,
the
so
building.
it's in the building.
They do sculpture, and they're in third year. And she's got brown curly hair.
Wow, I don't really care why she took it.
But you just want it back.
I want it back. I have no questions asked.
An amnesty.
There's an amnesty, right, you know,
I'll
so
let her know.
let her know that that was not for her to have. Okay, that is my chair. I want it back.
I just saw her with it, and I was like,
What the fuck?
Yes.
I presume it's just, yeah, I think it is definitely that chair.
I'm sure it's that chair.
Let's hope she's not wrapped it in kind of garbage and set it on fire.
Well, is that filming right now? Can I just say, Francesco, who did the chairs that one of you is sitting on over there, he had this great idea for the chairs, and he painted one. Thank you so much for doing that. He painted one, and the other one he decided to smash into pieces. So don't do that. If you're going to take any of my chairs and want to make art out of it, don't destroy them. Try and go into design as opposed to art. Okay, we ready? Ready to rock and roll? Okay, so first the AHRC moment. I think it's due January 7th, 8th, or 9th. I don't know exactly when. There's a website called the Three Cities. I'll send you the proper link as soon as I know it. But something like the Midlands Three Cities or something like that.
Yeah, it's within 3 cities.
Yeah, the Midlands Three Cities. That will really help you find it, won't it? You know, so they're already trying to just see if you can find it. That's the first clue. Anyway, like I said in the announcement today, there's 411 awards. It's divided over 4 years, so I think 100 a year basically by 5 universities, so that's 20 a university. You start seeing how tight the competition is, and that's across the university. So it's not like 20 in the School of Art or something like that. It's 20 in the whole of BCU. And that's if we get them, because they're not going to be equitably shared. We just put in the best application. Okay, so that's that. Any questions on that? Great. Okay, the next thing that you should know is that on the 28th, which is Thursday, next Thursday, is the Article Press launch, which you must be there as a point of pride. You could even be there just because you want to be there, but it would be great for you to be there. It'll be in the lecture hall. Grace and Dane and Jakob and a couple other people. Who else is involved with
Andre.
And Andre, For Your Sins, are developing this thing. Is it going to be great?
Yeah, I reckon it's going to be really good.
Yeah, might as well have fun, you know.
There's going to be booze. It's a good start, eh?
Yeah, that's true. And what's funny is that Henry said that it absolutely was not possible. It was not possible for this to happen. And I said, it is possible. You have to have it. So now, you have to keep working on him. He's very shy. He doesn't want to be in front of the camera. So, but one of his books is going to be there. So he's got to be there too. So just keep working on him. So that's that. And what else? Do anything else? No. Okay, good. let's begin. Did you make it to the conference over the weekend? No? You mean we spent time discussing how to do this and nobody went? God.
I did go to one film, but I paid to go in.
Shame on you.
That's right. That's terrible. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, that's a pity. Okay, let's begin. Today, we have a couple things to do. One is, I am perfectly happy to keep going over the questions until we fall on our faces, okay? So, but before we do that, I really would like to at least get part of the discussion going on the dialectic, because you only had part of a lecture before. So what I'd like to do today is to combine, well, first of all, to give you a bit more of a standing, as it were, on what the dialectic is about, and the difference between historical materialism and the dialectic called historical materialist dialectic, and the Hegelian dialectic, which is idealist or speculative. Sorry. Now, the first word you need to get in your mind is the word subjective. Subjective. And notice it's got subject in there. And if I said to you, what's your subject? What you would understand that to mean, what are you talking about? What's your title? What's it about? So keep remembering that kind of thing. The "iv" of subject is adjectival, so it gives it the way in which something takes on meaning. That's what it means to be a subject. But we also know that a subject means being beholden, like if you're the subject of the queen, right? That form of subject, or subjection. So there's different forms of the subject running around that you need to, and they're all tied in with this word. So don't forget that. The next word you need to know about is objective. And in that word is object. So if I said the object of my discussion today is blah, would that be the same thing as the subject of my discussion today? No. If I said the object is X, what would that be?
Go.
The goal, what's the gist of what's being said? What's the point of it? That would be a very lay sense of object. If I say objective, and I mean it to be in a court of law, this is objective, what would you understand that to be? Independent, neutral.
No opinion, it's like you take yourself away.
It's true,
Yeah.
right? So if I said this thing I'm going to tell you about is subjective, you would, I think, assume that it would have some, let's say, nuance to it. It might have some shade or interpretation involved. That would be part of this thing called the subject, or the subjective. Whereas the object seems to mean that it's without question. You know, that it happens, like if I go and I slap Andre across the face, he's not going to go, well, it's my view that you've slapped me across the face. He's going to say, you slapped me across the face and I'm going to sue you now, right, or something like that, or I'm going to at least wonder, why did you do that? You know, so there's something that is, quote, real. I'm going to use these are these horrible words that we're going to play with today. There's something supposedly real about this thing called the objective, where there's something more floaty, more movable, more elastic about this thing called the subjective. Now, you should know that for years and years, hundreds of years, there's been a fight between this thing called objective and this thing called subjective. And the question is, is reality, is our reality, objective or subjective? Now, Hegel argues that it's subjective. That if it were objective in this not changing, always true position, then how would you account for change? He goes further to say that in this thing called the subjective, or the, in this thing called the objective, Hegel wants to say that all things that are objective have a nuance. There's no such thing as a neutral position on anything. There's no such fact that is without some kind of way of interpreting it. And he comes to this, as you might know, because he argues that when you start with the now, the here, the only way for you to grasp that, the only way for you to grasp this here and now is through intuition, is through mediation of some kind. So the immediate, the not mediated, is the only thing that would be objective in a certain sense, but it doesn't mean anything. It's the only thing that, in order for you to comprehend it, to grasp it, it has to be mediated. Now, other people argue that that's just not the whole picture, because if everything were subjective, then either one, it would be relative to my opinion, your opinion, Natalia's opinion, you know, there'd just be a bunch of opinions, and whoever was stronger won. And that would be the way in which subjective would operate. So there's a big fight. What really creates this thing called reality? Okay, now there's a second thing that you have to think about, and that is this thing called reality. Is there one reality, or are there like a zillion realities? Your reality, my reality, your grandmother's reality. Like, how many realities are there on the head of a pin? Okay, so both Hegel and Marx argue that there's one reality. They basically agree with each other, and that way that reality is fully understood is dialectically. So let us not forget that the dialectic stands for all that there is, thesis, all that there isn't, the antithesis, taken together creates a synthesis, which comes back around and forms the ground for thesis and antithesis. And that movement of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, back around, ground, that whole movement really doesn't go anywhere. It just has air in it. It's not stuck together where nothing can move. Question so far? Question? No, you're just making a face. Okay, question? Right. I don't mean to, I wasn't trying to embarrass you. You're making a face. Someday when you are up here doing this, you will see both the joys and the trauma, you know. Anyway, bless. Good thing you're sitting way over there. I'll have to say.
He's not that way over.
He's not that way over. It depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Okay, so now, I asked you to take a look. First of all, are you more or less clear-ish around the way this dialectic works? So the thing about dialectic is that it moves, or it creates a logic that is alive, that is dynamic. For example, right on cue. Okay, so it creates a dynamic, and that is crucial. So whichever side you come down on, objective or subjective, both argue that it's dynamic. Marx argues that laws are as dynamic and are in fact changeable as rules. The difference, though, is that a law is a little bit harder to change. So, again, I think I've mentioned this before, if I decided to jump out the window, let's say I was doing some very interesting drugs, and I thought, I think I can fly. and I take a running, flying leap out the window, but luckily it's only 3 feet off the ground, and I fall down. Because no matter what my opinion is, the law of gravity means I'm going to go down. So that notion of the law, it's not like a rule that says don't jump out the window. You're forbidden to jump out the window. It's a law that says if you jump out the window, you will hurt yourself. That's the difference between a rule and a law. A rule is a conventional position around which people make decisions, and they become quite strict sometimes, but they can be broken rules. In fact, people might argue that rules are made to be broken, but that's another whole argument. Okay, now, we're okay so far? So we got subject, we've got object. So do not think to yourself, not think to self, that the subject is more, I don't know, more descriptive, and the object is more, I don't know, hardcore. Don't think that. They're both hardcore. Okay, the difference is that what Marx is arguing is that the objective, while it is dynamic, it is able to put forward a political position. So that's a kind of interesting position around what is object, because now you see that objective doesn't mean neutral for Marx. It is exactly the reverse. Being objective means having a position. That's, you know, it's like the law of gravity, you might want to say, has a position on gravity. The position is you will go down. It's not to be discussed. That's how it, quote, is. It is the downness of being pulled. Marx is saying that the objective is, has a color to it, has a meaning to it, has dirt to it. In fact, it's called a dirty logic. So the thing he gets annoyed about with Hegel is that for Hegel, his argument, according to Marx, is that it's too clean. It's that it's too sterilized. It's too perfect. It makes perfect sense, literally. It's about absolute, capital A, absolute logic. 1 + 1 is 2. It's not 1 + 1 is sort of kind of in a way 2. And therefore, it can never really approach life, because life is messy. Life is dirty. Life is problematic. And in order to understand how it operates, how life operates in the one reality that we're in, you need to take that as a given. So the objective path, the start for Marx, is to take the dirt seriously and to not try and clean it up, not try and get rid of it. So he argues that what the problem with speculation and the problem with speculative idealism, which is, by the way, not the same as speculative realism, which we'll get to next semester, but speculative idealism is that for Marx, the idealism is kind of important in the sense that it says there's a concept, you fight for this concept, you fight for democracy, you fight for women's rights, you fight for this thing that the family or whatever the concept is that you're fighting for. But if you understand that without its dirt, if you understand that without its blood and pain and sensuousness, then you understand nothing about life. So the objective reality of life is precisely that it's crap, that it's rough. And it's like, wake up and smell the coffee, for Marx. Do not academicize, do not put into ivory tower sport reality. That doesn't mean it can't be analyzed. the reverse. It can be analyzed, just don't use idealist tools. Because if you use idealist tools, you're going to come up with an idealist solution. And what Hegel comes up with, by the way, is, which is kind of interesting, is he argues that the state, the perfect form of the state is managerialism, which is like, God! Anyway, we're not going to go there yet. In his work, there's a person named Proudhon. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. Proudhon. Proudhon. How would you pronounce this? Proudhon. Okay. You have to have the gravitas in the throat. He wrote a book called The Philosophy of Poverty. Now, I just want you to know that this book, when I was growing up as a young child, I was gonna say as a young lad, anyway, never, as a young thing, when I was growing up and I came across the philosophy of poverty, this is a book that Marx turned on its head and he called it The Poverty of Philosophy. He hated this book. This book was, I think it sent him into like a nervous breakdown reaction, hives, you know, everywhere, because, and he hated the word philosophy. In fact, for the longest time, that's what I was going to say, I never would call myself a philosopher because it was just so awful to admit that being a philosopher was, at the time, linked directly to being an idealist or a metaphysician. And there's nothing worse if you want to do politics and you want to get your hands dirty and you want to get out there and be a little bit of a street fighter, to be a philosopher. It's just like, what? It's like sort of going the wrong, it's deciding that you're really very tired, I'm going to go to the country club and relax. You know, it's just like doesn't, you know, work. So he argued, Proudhon argues, that there's a philosophy to poverty. And he comes up with this model on poverty, which does in fact totally forget this little thing called economics. And Marx gets completely annoyed about this, and he calls it the poverty of philosophy, because the poverty of philosophy is precisely, according to Marx, that it's speculative, that it cleans everything up, and that despite its protestations otherwise, it still is presenting a model. It's still presenting an abstraction that it then tries to see things through this abstraction. What is the abstraction for Marx? Idealist dialectics. It's the form of dialectics we were talking about. Now, this is a very complex story, and if you're looking at your essay questions and anybody who's doing Hegel will know just how lovely and addictive this view is. And it's so lovely and addictive that it's still with us today, because it is a brilliant analysis, and I'm giving you kind of a very, I say this with love, a very master's level of understanding. Now that's not nothing, but it's complex, and we're going to try and like play around with the complexity. So Marx says, you want to know about life, you want to know about poverty, go outside. You know what the difference is between you and the girls on the street who are marketing their sex? The car door. That's the difference. There's no difference. You are just projected a little bit more, unless you happen to be also the girl doing the hooking. There's no. Do you want to understand how this all works? Don't go looking at thesis, antithesis, you know, synthesis, unless you understand what to start with. You don't start with the idea. You start with the grit. You start with the history. So for for Marx, what he does is he takes this model that Hegel has set up, which was, as I said, thesis on the one hand, antithesis on the other. He keeps the model. It is one is sublated into the other, it's synthesized, that comes back around and creates the ground. But for Marx, he turns it sideways, let's say. He puts it slightly different. So the synthesis for Marx, for Hegel, is knowledge. And we know that the highest form, and we know that the highest form of knowledge comes back around and grounds everything, right? Remember that part, or do I have to go over that again? Is that It's okay? We can go forward? But Marx says, let's just turn that this way, so that in fact what the ground is, though now we've turned it, that we've got knowledge here, and let's say the conceptual base over there. We've got basis, antithesis, right? And that this is where you're starting. Start here, just like Hegel does. The difference being is that this is dirty. This is not just sort of sitting there like, you know, A, not A, B, not B. This is proletariat, or bourgeoisie, proletariat, or this is history. He's going to call this history. You start with history. So for Marx, starting at the present doesn't mean you start with this empty is that then has to be sublated. You start with something that is an is that is not empty at all. It is so not empty that he says that we all inherit the nightmares, the living nightmares, as he calls it, of our parents. You are born into this world, but you are not neutrally born into this world. You're born in this world and you are already carrying the bullshit of your forefathers and foremothers. Another way of putting this is that, and this is where Rousseau was kind of an interesting, you've heard of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? And if not, I can tell you his name, Rousseau, R-O-U-S-S-E-A-U. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was a real character. He was, I think when he was like 23, he had to take an exam, and the exam was explain the origins of inequality. And so, and again, it was one of these questions, it was a philosophical question, it was kind of like the poverty, the philosophy of poverty. And he wrote nonstop for his exam, and he ended up writing this thing that ended up getting published as The Origins of Inequality. And the origins of inequality were, it was kind of depressing that he did this on an exam, so don't feel bad, he was like 22. Anyway, they taught people very differently. Okay, he basically said, this is your piece, you mind if I draw on this? Okay. He basically said, you want to know the origins of inequality? I tell you the origins of inequality. It's not, you know, some sort of philosophic moment in the sky with, you know, there was nothing and then there was something and then there's no. He said, the origins of inequality is when some guy stood in the sand and with his toe, he actually wrote this in the thing, with his toe made a big circle. And he called everything inside that circle mine. And then he found people stupid enough to believe him. That's the origin of inequality. So, and then he develops it, of course, into this like 400-page essay, which is annoying. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so for anybody with writer's block, don't read that. You'll get depressed. Okay, so put his toe in the sand. He drew a line around it, and he said, that's mine. And then he found people stupid enough to believe him. That's what he says is the first moment of class. That's the class move. The class move is to say, mine, mine, mine. Now, there's lots of different arguments for this. There's psychological arguments you could hear. There are, you know, whatever, different positions. This is again why Freud, remember little Sigmund, who we ditched in one session, 2 sessions, who made the argument that it's not psychology, it's psychoanalysis, which is very different. It's an analytic, which is about projection. It's not about the mindness of something. It's all about projection. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, now, so Marx says, he writes his position about how much he hates Hegel and how much he hates speculative idealism in 11 theses. So if you want to know the whole of Marxism and you don't want to study anything else, all you need to read is a 2-page document, which you should have read for today, called the Theses on Feuerbach. 11 Theses on Feuerbach. The 11 Theses, T-H-E-S-E-S. 11 Theses on Feuerbach. Now, Feuerbach was a materialist. And he wasn't a historical materialist. He was a thing called a materialist. And Feuerbach was somebody who was trying to argue against Hegel. So you had Hegel, who was the giant here, who was an idealist, and then you had these people called materialists. And the materialists could see there was a problem with Hegel. They just weren't able to get beyond it, really. And a lot of your work, I say this with love, sort of, is materialist. Materialist in not a good way. Materialist in this way, which is that you see what you want to prove and then you go off and you take it as an example and you prove it. I'll say what I mean now. So one of the things that Feuerbach argues is that revolutions happen when you're starving. And that the more hungry you get, the more mean, the more able you are to fight. And Marx said, yeah? And how many fights happened in the kitchen? Some. But whole revolutions, people weren't enslaved because they weren't hungry enough. People didn't overthrow slavery or not overthrow slavery because they just didn't get around to it or because they were well fed. Slavery existed because people were literally caught, enslaved. That's the reality, said Hegel. The reality isn't that you thought, think I'll be a slave today. No, maybe not. No, maybe, yes. No. Or that you get so hungry and so exhausted and so X and so Y that you just say, I've got nothing to lose, I'm going to fight. You know what happens when you get like that? You die. Okay, 9 times out of 9.1. If you have no food, if you have no clothing, if you have no shelter, the odds that you will be able to pick up and create a revolutionary move is a little complex. It happens. That's what revolutions are made of. That's what the revolution of 1848 was about, the Paris communes. The fight was, we have nothing to lose but our lives. And guess what? They lost their lives. The state is very powerful. It goes into very different sort of faces, but it's very powerful. Now, every epoch, like the one we're in now, let's say on computing, web environments, creates a moment of dispersion, argues Marx. Obviously, he wasn't talking about computing because he didn't know the computer, but it creates this moment of a break, which is called a conjunctural, it's like conjunctivitis, I know, like an eye problem. Conjunctural versus organic crises. Every time a major economic moment comes to present itself somehow, and the somehow is not just by some miracle, computers happen and just jumped on the scene. A crisis happens in the state. And either the state is able to figure out how to recover and everything goes back to, like, it's what one of my professors when I was a little girl used to say to me was, it's like plastic with a memory. The state like gets melted down and comes right back out and remembers itself. It's like the Terminator. Yes. Yes, the state, yes. See, I was brought up with plastic as a memory, but you were brought up with Terminator? Yeah, that's about right. Okay, so there's 2 types of crises. There's organic, which means things are bad. Things are going to really break. Or things are good, depending on the position you're in. And there's conjunctural, which appear to be organic, but aren't. They're just prolonged, painful annoyances. And in the 18th Brumaire, which we also went through today, 18th Brumaire, Brumaire of 1848. Or, is it the year? I don't know. 18th Brumaire of 1852. Okay. It's a very interesting argument that he gives. But I'm going to circle back. I just want to get these things on the table here. So we've got the thesis on Feuerbach. We have the 18th Brumaire, which is about these crises I'm going to talk about in a minute. And we have one more thing on the table that you need to remember about, other than, and I already told you about the philosophy of poverty, which is the poverty of philosophy. And the last sort of text that you need to complete this sort of little thumbnail sketch of Marx is the preface, what's called the preface to the critique of political economy. So, you've got the preface to the critique, is its abbreviated name, the preface to the critique of political economy. You have the 18th Brumaire, you have the theses on Feuerbach, and you have the philosophy of poverty. The poverty of philosophy, sorry. Now, remember what I said at the outset. You have the objective, and what Marx is trying to do is that this objective, he wants to show how the objective is sensuous. By sensuous, he means that it's vital, it's dynamic, it has flaws, it has warts, it has eczema, it is alive in that sense, it shits. This is the big crisis with speculative anything. It's too clean. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't put its menstrual period everywhere walking down the street. I don't know, for those of you that have had periods, obviously there's a group of you that haven't had them. One of my favorite things was, when I was little, was always excited. I thought having a period was the most fantastic thing ever, but I think I was a minority of one. Anyway, I used to think it was fantastic to wear like white skirts and things like that and just drip on the floors just to upset people. And it really did work. I mean, people really did get, you were bleeding, I know. You know, they're like, you know, it's fantastic. The fun you can have with periods, you never knew. Anyway, now, how does that get, see, that often gets interpreted in this really horrible way, you know, it's called the rag or the something, you know, I mean, I don't know what all the things are that it can be called, but, you know, what else is it called? The curse, that's it.
Curse is
The curse.
horrible.
Yeah, the curse, great, you know, it's like this thing, lifeblood, literally, you know, you just drip it everywhere, it's fantastic, you know, really, honestly, it's no more fun than that, you know, really. Also swimming in the pool, little trails, it's fantastic, you know, I loved it, I just thought this was the most fantastic thing ever, you know, but like I said, I think I'm a minority of one. Is there anybody else that loves their periods?
Yeah, when we used to go to Beaningham Common and paint tampons just to freak people out and hang them up, because I was like a kid of the 80s and that's what we did. It was just quite funny really.
Yeah, say the joys you can have with tampons, who knew? Now, I raised this, first of all, because it just had to be done, but also because the idea that one would understand how reality sort of sets itself up has these tampons, has these like weird things that are going on. And if that's not part of your concept of the objective, then what is? You want to know about life? Then talk about it. That's Marx's primary position, and that's what he starts with in the theses on Feuerbach. So the very first thesis on Feuerbach says that the world is sensuous, and that the problem with Feuerbach's work on materialism is that he doesn't realize that materiality is sensuous. If it's anything else, if it's anything at all, it's sensuous. That's what is material. Now, how do you capture the sensuous? How do you hold it? So if you're talking about material, what you might think is literally, you know, material. This is material. That's and therefore it's objective. It's going to be right here. So if you're saying sensuousness and that's material, that seems very ephemeral. But Marx is saying no, that is as strong, if not stronger, than what you see. The sensuous is what gives it that nuance, that gives it that unique flavor that makes it real. Without that unique flavor, it ain't real. It's just a model. It's just abstraction. It's just a perfect name. So he basically says that Feuerbach, in wanting to say, we gotta deal with, material aspects of reality, and there's a whole thing around the food in the kitchen, if you get into Feuerbach, you'll see when you read them. He says, people, when they starve, they starve. That's the downside. All these people, a moment of, silence and love for the people in the Philippines right now. I mean, horrible scenario, but horrible. Their suffering is not making them ready to fight. Not necessarily, Sometimes suffering is suffering. And you need to look at it in the face and not run away from it. Not run away from death, not run away from pain. You need to make it work. You need to work with it. And that's what Marx is saying. And he's saying that Hegel has no clue about this. Especially in his thing on the master-slave dialectic, where he basically says the slave is the one that has all the power. I mean, hello? And if you believe that one, I can tell you a whole thing about how the monarchy is just, state pensioner or something. So what he's saying in number one, we're going to look at it in a second, but the first thesis on Feuerbach, he says that sensuousness is objective, is the fact of life. And that is the primary thing. He also says, he asks a very important question, I think it's the third thesis on Feuerbach, where he says, who is it that educates the educator? Who is it that, for those of you that are mommy and daddies right now, or for those of you that don't have family above you in a certain sense, like when my grandfather died, my grandmother died, and that kind of set, it's kind of like a horizon sort of ebbs away, and then you move closer to the great unknown, and then both my parents are gone, and so then they die, so then you're kind of like, uh-oh, okay, very close to that unknown. Okay. Who educates you when you're at that point? Who educates the educator? Now, if you're religious, you're going to say, well, God does. But Marx, as you know, is secular. And for him, religion is the opiate of the people, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard that expression a million times. So who educates you when you are the last one in the row, as it were?
The children.
Yes. He says, you want to understand how the dialectic operates really? It's not that the slave is in power. It's that there's a symbiotic relationship that happens with, as he puts it, he doesn't put it as children, he puts it as teacher-student. A teacher who doesn't learn from their students is crap. A teacher who just expounds and then, goes away into a closet somewhere isn't teaching. Because if you're not learning while you're teaching, then you're not doing nothing. And the same way with you guys, you need to learn how to teach in your learning. This relationship that goes back and forth. He's saying that this forms the first, we're going to use a new word, nexus, N-E-X-U-S, nexus. The first sort of bridge that allows for this flow of learning and teaching. So, the first thesis is on the fact that objectivity is sensuous. It's not an opinion. It's not an opinion. It has nothing to do with opinion. It's just not clean. It's not sterilized. It can't be put into some kind of, box. It can't be put in the box. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that notion of objectivity requires a nexus. That is to say, there's always this relationship between teacher-student, or, well, it's a dialectical relation. that exist, the same way that A, not A, exist. Teaching doesn't exist without learning, and learning doesn't exist without teaching. So he's saying, this is the next important aspect you have to understand about Marxism, or what you do know that Marx didn't call himself a Marxist, or maybe you don't know this. Marx never referred to himself as a Marxist. In fact, he was horrified. He was introduced at a conference he had to give a program notes at this thing called the Goethe program, and they introduced him as a Marxist. He was like, what? It was like ridiculous. It's like Foucault calling him a Foucauldian. So it was like completely ridiculous, or Derridian or something. He was like, I am so not a Marxist. Now that has been interpreted many ways, including that he hated Marxism, okay, or that whatever. I leave it to you to figure out what he might have meant, but I can assure you that if you were, let's say, Foucault, and they said, and Foucault's a Foucauldian, you're just sort of like, what does that mean? Okay, whatever. So Marx never referred to himself as this thing called Marxism, but this thing he was laying out was historical, what he called historical materialism, or in fact dialectical historical materialism. So the first was the accent on the word materialism, that not all things that are materialist are politically right. I don't mean correct in that kind of narrow sense. I mean our work, or not even political, are analytically correct.
Say that again.
Not all things that are material are analytically correct. It's the only way to look at it. He's saying that it's got to be historical materially there. To say that something's historically materially there, which is a bit of a mouthful, is to say that there's more to the story than might meet your eye. That there's like I said, you're born and you bring in your parents, your grandparents, your whole cultural moment comes with you when you're born. There's no neutral birth. That's the first thing. So the second thing is that this historical materialism is a dialectical historical materialism. So he's saying that the base, which for Hegel was knowledge that then gave meaning to both sides, for Marx is economics. Now when I say economics, when you, meaning Carl and I, say economics, I don't mean to say economic determinism. I mean economics itself also as being sensuous, an economy. By economy, this movement, the circulation of life. That's the economy. So don't think that he's trying to make an argument around the economy as being this, this Tory notion of economics. This one, getting bread on the table. He's not talking about that, only that form of economics. He's talking about the whole circulation of what it is that allows for this material reality to emerge. Now this base, obviously, as you know, he's following the dialectic, has like on the one side something that's going to be the thesis, on the other side something else is going to be the antithesis, the base being this economy of movement. I'll call it economy of movement so you don't mess up and think he's just talking about this thing called economics as we know it now, macroeconomics. So this economy of movement, which is the base, this dirty thing that is the base of the 2 points, that those 2 points synthesize and sublate and have all sorts of fun with each other, and they create something. That something they create is history. So this kind of, you start with the economic sensuous materiality of life. It gets sublated into history, as we already know. That produces big H history, which comes back around and forms the ground of little h history and little m material. And that base is also called the economy. But I have to say it in this very layered way so that you don't think it's just economics, politics, ideology, or something like that. And he clarifies this in the preface to the Critique of Political Economy. The notion political economy is a euphemism for a leftist code word. For some of us that are longer in the tooth, we know that you, like I said, you would never refer to yourself as a philosopher. You, at best, refer to yourself as a political economist, by which one meant, or a radical political economist, which was basically Matt going to Manchester, you know, with the flags, you know. Now, I remember when I was trying to go to figure out where I was going to go to school. In the U.S., they only had one school that was teaching political economy, and that was a place called Antioch. And Antioch was a very radical law school in Massachusetts, which I thought, I might want to go there. But then I found out that this thing called Manchester, you know, that was the birthplace of political economy. I was like so excited, I could hardly maintain myself. I was really excited, but I didn't have any money. So I got this huge fellowship to go to Canada and study political economy, and I was thrilled. All we did was read Marx and Capital, and can you imagine that now? It was an actual thing in political science departments called political economy, and that's what you studied. You studied the circulation of capital, you studied all of Marx, you studied, you know, everybody that wrote, you know, from Althusser till, you know, like the economic determinist, to all forms of economic thinkers. That's what you studied in political science. You don't see that now.
My sister did that at Manchester, PPE.
Yes, see, Manchester.
That's what she did,
That's
my
a-
older sister.
That famous word.
And they did all that.
And in fact, the London School of Economics was born from that. Moment of silence. We know what's happened to the London School of Economics. Anyway, very conservative now. Okay, now let's just make sure that we've got the whole map before we start opening the books and looking at what's going on. We have the theses on Feuerbach, and the one main thing you should remember about the theses on Feuerbach is that the objective is sensuous. Whatever else you remember about it, including the famous line, thesis 11, that the only thing you have to lose is your chains. That the problem with philosophers, says Marx, is that philosophers have only interpreted the world. But the point is to change it. That's Marx. That's vintage Marx. And that sentence still gives me chills. It still means something to me when I hear it. Because what else is there to do? The world is so full of crap. You might as well try and change it, you know, or go down trying. But this was the whole thesis on Feuerbach. It starts with, remember people, life is sensuous. It ends by saying, philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point is to change it. So when you think of the long trajectory that I've been on, I call myself a philosopher now, not because I actually think that I've given up and I think that, you know, maybe the point is only to interpret the world and I now want to do crossword puzzles and Sudoku, but rather something else has happened with philosophy, which we're going to find out next semester, but that's another issue. So I just want you to be clear, as clear as you can be. Hegel, in the Phenomenology of Spirit, is attacking the corrosive, narrow-minded notion of the objective as being always already true, immobile. He says you cannot account for change if you don't understand how truth is itself change. Truth names change. And for him to make that claim, he goes through these many loops around the dialectic. And Marx says, very brilliant, fantastic. Yay. Wrong. That's my problem with it. It's good up to a certain point, and then it's wrong because it doesn't accommodate humanity. Not really. Not humanity with all the sores and the pimples and the boredoms. Doesn't bring in that form of it. Okay. Any questions so far before I just finish off with one little bit before we open the book? How homo was that? Any questions so far about that? Okay, one more, oh yeah, Anita?
I'm stretching.
You're stretching, okay, very bad. Okay, one last thing to tell you, okay, so you got in your head several things, right? One of the several things you have is that the very most important thing you need to know about the thesis on Feuerbach is
The objective is sensuous.
the objective is sensuous. That is the most important thing. Just write it on your forehead, backwards, so when you look in the mirror, you know what it's saying. Okay, the objective is sensuous. Just have as a mantra, objective is sensuous, objective, and we can chant it in groups. That's the most important thing. The second most important thing about the thesis on Feuerbach is who educates the educator?
The educated.
The educated.
The one who's being educated.
The pupil.
student.
Yes. Okay? And the last thing is, what is the problem with philosophers?
So they analyze the world, the point is changing.
Good. Okay, so now you know three main things. Of course, there are 11 theses on Feuerbach, so let's not forget that little bit. Okay. Now, of the preface to the critique of political economy, in the preface to the critique, Marx argues that you need to read the preface. It was only 3 pages long, so it's not going to be painful. Well, it's going to be painful, but it's not going to be that painful. He makes the argument that what is the base of the, what is the start of the movement, the dialectic, history, and what happens, and what is history sublated by?
Economy of the movement.
Economy. Just economy. It's sublated, so it becomes this historical economy like circulation that produces some form of historical materialism that comes back around, dialectical historical materialism, and produces the substantial notion of the objective for Marx. So the objective is this breathing, living, dynamic thing that has one thing extra to it that doesn't exist in Hegel. It has the political. The political is precisely that which gives meaning to an object, that which gives it its tone. Now I'm going to go back to that because I threw that in. It's a little bit complicated. Now just bracket that for one moment, just for a second. Just stick it somewhere in the corner. I want to talk to you about power. It's always a fun topic, one of my favorite topics. You know, there's the very typically American expression, you know, power corrupts, absolute power is kind of nice. You know, it's kind of a, this is what Marx is getting at. It says, how would you really understand power? How do you really understand power? Do you feel powerful? Where's that wine? How do you understand? Remember we started this course off with the Enlightenment. You know, you're supposed to be able to dare to know and all the rest of this garbage, right? You know, are you daring to know every 5 minutes? Are you daring to know at all? Let's start very basically. Have you dared to know today? It's like taking your pill.
No.
You know, have you dared to know today? How many people have dared to know today? No one. Great.
No, I have.
Okay,
I've
one
explored
person's
it,
dared to know.
Yeah, I
Okay.
had a really good tutorial with Jen.
Yeah, so did I.
Good. Okay, so 2 people dared to know today. Okay, what did that mean when you dared to know?
You're open
Right. To what?
to receive.
Okay, that's one way of daring to know.
Yeah.
So let's put it like that. If that's a way to dare to know, which is acceptable, that means that the notion of power there isn't just your ability to interact or your ability to do something, but it's also your ability to receive something. So that's one form of power, the ability to receive. Another form of power is your ability to say no. These are the things that you need to learn. Now, try not to learn them in my class, okay? Because, you know, if I ask you to do something, you don't go, no. Do it in somebody else's class. But anyway, the point is that saying no is another form of power. So one form of power is receiving, is knowing how to receive. That's a form of power. Another form of power is the ability to say no, no, not doing it, forget it, that's not happening. And if enough of you say no, it'll change. See, the trick for those that have power is to divide people off from each other. And that way, if you say no, you don't know the other person's saying no, so nobody says no because you think the other person's saying yes, and it doesn't happen. Now, so revolution is always about the ability to say no in mass. The intelligent ability to say no. Okay, the next thing about power you should understand is that power is not homogeneous. It's not a blob that look like Marmite. It comes and rolls over you or reverses. In fact, what Marx argues in the 18th Brumaire is that, now he is following the Newtonian form of physics, which is pretty much underwriting a lot of this argument, where, as you know, or as you may remember, two objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time. That's the basic principle of Newtonian physics. But another one, the other famous one, is nature abhors a vacuum. How many times have you heard this sentence? You know, I think about it when I'm vacuuming. It's unnatural. It's like, okay, so nature abhors a vacuum. Now, Marx takes this and he makes an analysis around power structures, and he says, basically, if you want to understand how power operates on these other echelons, so we've now had this picture of the economic base, by which we mean the circulation, the economical circulation of the movement of things, history, knowledge, so on, this material movement, that when you are, I'm just thinking, how can I say this better? Okay. I'll start again. In 1813 was it? When was Napoleon Bonaparte the First killed? Or 1815, the Battle of Waterloo, right? So now he argues that, but he lost. Yes, same. He's gone. Now in that battle, it's very interesting. By the way, if you think that you can get away studying politics or art or anything and not understand war and not understand violence, you're kidding yourselves. You know, anybody who teaches the political and leaves out the most obvious elephant in the room, which is, you know, military-industrial complex, drone strikes, you know, it's not giving you kind of the whole picture. So, and you're not giving yourself the whole picture. So what Marx says is that let us look at the role of Napoleon the First. Napoleon the First with Bonaparte the First was a kind of interesting character. Little, hand in his chest all the time. Lots of comments about, you know, what was he doing with that hand, and so on and so forth, but it was very high up, so I don't know. And he did things like brought in this thing called the Napoleonic Code. Do you know what that is, the Napoleonic Code? Has anybody ever heard of the Napoleonic Code?
I heard about it, but I can't remember now.
It was absolute. He had absolute power, and
Well, he was a monarch.
well, his
He was an
subjects
emperor.
had to do.
No,
what he said.
there's something weird about the Napoleonic Code, not dissimilar to what the subjects in England have to do with their monarchy. What's the Napoleonic Code about? Okay, I'm not going to tell you because you should have read this. But anyway, the Napoleonic Code. Just try and mark it like you need to know. A need to know problem. Now, Napoleon, according to Marx, was kind of an interesting monarch in the sense, or was an interesting empire in the sense that he was emperor, in the sense that he wasn't radical, but he was progressive, and that's interesting. You know, he was in a certain way, just like right now, there seems as though there's a big machine that's just doing Tory things, and no matter who gets into power, the Tory moment happens. It's just interesting how that happens, and sometimes people can get into the machine, and it just turns out to be more progressive. This is what happened with, against, Lyndon Johnson's thing, He was in the machine, they were trying to turn back the Kennedy thing, they were trying to turn back the civil rights movement, and just kept moving in the direction of the left. Now, it didn't just do it by accident, it's just like, it's kind of, well, which way we go, we'll just go in that. But there's something about the movement of history, this momentum of history, that is like turning around a huge ocean liner. So this momentum of history, this material circulation of history is going on. And Napoleon is forefronting what is basically this sort of, let's say, progressive leap, or progressive lurch, is what I say. You know, so he's kind of lurching to, not the left, but let's say some form of a enlightenment moment. Okay, there is the loss, you know, the failure to win at the Waterloo. And then, what happens with the barricades? You know anything about that? Anybody watch Les Mis? Horrible film. Okay, let's say. Don't tell me if you loved it. Did you love it?
I love the film, but I love the show. Yeah.
You love the show?
No, that's even worse, Millie.
Why?
What's
What's
this to
wrong
you?
with it?
Oh, horrible musical theatre.
I love it.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
do you know when that happened? Do you know what the story of the film was about? Or let's say the show, let's not talk about the film.
Yeah, but not in like a deep way, just the whole like loaf of bread kind of situation.
Do you know what the battles were about? Okay, forget about it, Billy. Does
Yeah,
anybody
I just
know?
think-
Does anybody, how about the 1848? Does that see,
Well, the peasants were revolting and they
Yeah.
let them eat bread.
okay, now, think about these weird years. 1848, this is before computers. You know that 1848 happened everywhere in Europe? This thing called 1848, this thing of rise up, take over problem is very interesting. It starts happening all over Europe. This is a very interesting year. Kind of like 1968. Another interesting year. We haven't had a lot of those interesting years happening. That they just, the 60s pretty much went from like 63-ish, or 62, let's say, to like 1969. Maybe it might have lurched into the 72 max. And then the 70s were a very short period. They went from like 72 to like 77, and then suddenly we were in the 80s. It's very interesting how time really is happening. It's kind of weird. And then the 80s lasted from let's say 78-ish, 77, 78, till around 91 or 2. And then the 90s happened. They were also another short shrift. And then suddenly we were in the 21st century, except that was like 97, 98, when the computers really started kicking over. Now, Mark starts to say, what is it about that those kind of weird, ruminating years, these weird kind of years? And he says, actually, it's what he's going to call movements of Caesarism, like Caesar. You know Caesar? You know who Caesar is?
Yeah, Julius.
Yes. And what did Caesar do?
Took over power. He was,
What did he do?
He took over power from the
For
Republic.
heaven's sakes, you guys can fall asleep while you're talking about Caesar. Like,
He could have
He controlled the army.
he did, what did he do?
He controlled the armies.
And
He
how did he
used
do
the
it?
army to create an image for himself and then become quasi a god, essentially.
Yeah.
Made himself
And then
more
what happened to
into a god.
Caesar?
He got stabbed by Brutus, 80 Brutes.
Note the safe use of knives. Yeah, so what did Caesar do? What's that, isn't there an expression of some kind?
Crossing the Rubicon.
No, not that expression.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. He
Didn't
took
somebody
over-
fiddle?
No, that was
No,
Nero.
that's Nero.
Nero. Okay, somebody fiddled, I knew it was. Okay, so Nero fiddled while Rome burned, right? And what was Nero in relationship to any of this?
Well, he was the great-great-grandson or something or other of Julius Caesar. There was a kind of a, not direct link, but there was he brought in a system of familial rule. in a
Okay,
sense.
so in Caesar's moment, when he lost pretty much face to face, or stab in the back, but it's the same idea. You know, he was hand-to-hand combat. Do you come to bury or praise Caesar and all the rest of this kind of thing? I mean, what's really going on and so on and so forth, right?
Mhm.
Then we scroll forward to Nero, and we have somebody who's lost power, but really lost, and he's just playing his violin or whatever the story is while Rome burns.
He's still been a man of
Those are
action.
two different forms of what Marx is calling Caesarism. One is the form well, actually, in fact, we're not even gonna talk about Nero, we're gonna talk about, something else, but one is the form where there's some kind of a, let's say, progressive thing. I mean, Caesar, the first Caesar, the god Caesar, was trying to create an environment that, in some sense, according to Marx, was progressing or was somehow moving the social environment in one direction. Whether or not you agreed with it is a different issue altogether, but it was something that was happening. Whereas the other Caesar was taking the time period backward. So there's two types of Caesarism.
But isn't it partly to do with Caesarion, because Caesarion's named after Caesar, because his mother died while he was taken out of the womb. So it's more like, it's like a cut as well, isn't it? It's like a sacrifice.
It is, but not in this, in this thing. So what he does is he argues that in the first Napoleon I, the way in which power is being consolidated was, let's say, in a progressive move, kind of like heading toward the 1848 or heading toward the 68s, moving this way. The second Napoleon that takes over, Napoleon III, as it turns out, was in fact very reactionary, took the society backward. So again, he's using these two different markers. So
Sort of democratic move.
the one is a democratic move, or the one is heading. They can't stop the march toward democracy, and the other is doing the other way around, backward move. Right? Okay. So now, in this backward move, that's why. So Marx says there's two. He calls them both Caesarist movements. One is the movement where something is going forward, and one is the movement where they're going backward. And he calls the moment of the backward move the 18th Brumaire. Now, why? This is what you need to understand about how the political organizes itself. He says that whenever you have these crises, organic or even conjunctural crises can always explode into a much bigger crisis. Like, for example, the guy who's doing crack cocaine in Toronto, which I think is hilarious on some level. I mean, and his, you know about this, the mayor of Toronto was found to be doing crack cocaine. And his argument was that he isn't an addict because he was blind drunk when he was doing crack cocaine, which is a fantastic argument. Just like, so that's like, that just gets the story worse, and then and then he tries to like say, well, I'm sorry, but I didn't really, you guys are annoying me, and he knocks over one of the congresswomen, and punches her out basically, trying to flee the scene. I mean, it's one of these kind of things that just keeps getting worse, and every time he tries to explain himself, he's just like a liability. You probably had people stay at your house like this, it's like you're like guests from hell, you think, wow, what do you about? So in that moment, where it just keeps getting worse and worse, and the more you do something, the worse it gets, and then, it's like this big, stain just keeps, Marx is calling this the moment of the vacuum. It's a power vacuum that's going on. And the question is, who's going to move in? Who's lining up to take it over? Who moves in? Once an 18th Brumaire situation is set up, and they are often set up, they certainly were set up in this country with, when the Tories couldn't, with Thatcher, couldn't hang on to power, there was an 18th Brumaire. Now, the chance that Labour would get in was anybody's guess. I mean, it was a very close call. That Labour got in, but they weren't able to lead as Labour. They got in, but they had to lead as Conservatives. That's what the 18th Brumaire is about. So I want to be very clear here. So you have the moment of power being lost or somehow fumbled, like in a football match or American football match, but the ball is fumbled, it's dropped like this. People grab for it, but it ends up becoming, let's say, an own goal or something like that. It ends up that in grabbing that power, the people, the party that grab it, are still not strong enough to really lead. So they end up having to wear the mantle of the agenda that was already happening. You following that? and that's an 18th Brumaire. And Marx is saying, spot the difference between my analysis and Hegel's. Hegel has no way of understanding how an 18th Brumaire happens, let alone addressing it. His argument, let's say Hegel's argument, is very good at the argument of how things get sublated, shows up, moves up, creates another thing, continues. That's great. I will steal this, says Marx. But what we need to understand is how the political enters the picture. And to understand the political, you have to understand power. And to understand power, first of all, you have to acknowledge it. You have to understand the forms it takes. Saying no. Learning how to exit. Silence. There are different forms of power. Some of them are more effective than others. And all of them depend on whether or not you're in an 18th Brumaire or not. So you could want to run and break through and dare to know and all the rest of those things, but if you're in an 18th Brumaire moment, you're going to be doing the agenda of a bigger picture. So you have to figure out how to break with that. Because if you keep banging your head against the wall, you're still going to be doing the old dance. So that particular strategy is going to work. So the second thing you need to know about the 18th Brumaire, apart from power vacuums, is that it's about strategy. And that strategy is a method as much as it's anything else. It's not an opinion. It's an analytic way of how you look and you see what lays before you. And you know then how to begin to move the pieces. And since the pieces aren't just on themselves sitting there going, oh yeah, you come here, I'm just knitting. Yeah. The pieces themselves are very dynamic and have views and opinions. The 18th Brumaire is always a very volatile environment. It's always a very intense scenario where you can get caught up in the tide, in the riptide as it were, and then you're doing the other agenda. One could make that argument about Obama, for example.
Yeah, hope. What's happened to hope?
Well, it's more than that. It's like he's, you know, if you give him the argument, which I'm willing to do, that he really was and has been trying to deal with racism and sexism and all the rest of these kind of things and the economy and so on, but he's in the moment. He came in a moment where he was stopping American fascism, really, and yet the Democratic Party was not strong enough to take the Republicans on, because they turned out to be a lot more vicious than was obvious. And that this ability, he ends up having to do this very weird 18th Brumaire move. It's a very odd dance. So he's trying to do this progressive thing, but it gets rolled back. That, I mean, it's obviously more complex than that, but I'm trying to give you an idea. Like, for example, Cameron right now is not in an 18th Brumaire situation. Cameron, what's his name? Clegg is. Clegg put his party into an 18th Brumaire situation. So the party had to end up going into the agenda of the Conservatives. Even though, on some level anyway, he was trying to, you know, do something, you know, that was different. Okay. Do you need a break? Well, Mark needs a break. Do you need a break before we open this up? You want a break? A quick break?
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a quick 5-minute break. Diet Cokes for all.
Wine.
That's, yeah, it's on till 7.
I'm worried about the wine. Yeah, it's on till 7. Rush, fly.
It's in the basement.
Okay, go get the stuff. Let me just find out where people are. Maybe I'll come out.
Ja mi się nie считаю себя.
Next week. Yeah. You would have gotten it back this week, but I'm still doing the ref. Just want to mention that. It's like the bane of my existence at this point. Is this making sense? Because, I mean, you've now had it for now a year, right? No, I mean, like, seriously, so, like, it's not the first time you've heard it. That, Nita, that's not, that wasn't meant as a derogatory thing.
It's making sense. Quite clear.
Is it making sense to you? Now?
It's a bit tougher than Hegel, but hanging in.
Yes. I know. This 18th Lumiere thing is one of my favorite.
I'll say I skimmed it. Didn't read it extensively. I spent too much time, I suppose, reading the Communist Manifesto and punching the air.
Yes.
Oh, I'm still there.
Sorry?
I'm still there. I'm still there. I'm still with it. Yeah. If I still think that that's the only
Which is fine, because I was interested in ideas.
you cannot say that was the communist country.
Okay, I'm in the middle of that. Turn it off.
It's now.
It's not. Has it ever happened? Is it ever going to happen?
It means that
And the name of the performance is
Selfish.
Yeah.
Selfish to survive.
because it means that more people can survive.
And then there's the question, is survival. And then what do they do with their lives?
How weird.
So,
I'm doing it.
so just
I would call the gas people.
say things like
Yeah, it's a 40
this is
Shut
going to be like
Okay.
In power.
That would have
oh yeah, I see what
Yeah,
so
Oh,
Andrew's emailed some of the people
yeah.
I can't envisage that.
sent their summary back.
Okay, can I go back?
But I don't know what
All right,
a
that's easy.
time where everything's there and everything's okay.
Yeah, I've been tomorrow.
I'm not
How are
saying
you
you should
feeling?
aim for that, but I think the aim of that can come from all directions and opinions and so
That's
on.
really interesting.
Understanding, I don't think there's, I just don't think there's like a definitive answer.
Yeah.
Human pain, this idea that every day, whole night, no sleep, and the next day I sleep very little time. I just see, the sun rise. Yeah, I didn't sleep whole night.
Well, she's heavily
Yeah, really.
It's caught. Yeah, like the iron log has.
She was.
Yes, when I started my BIAD course, and the same I write philosophy assignment.
Yeah,
So I stay whole night. You know, did you use MSN? Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah, you used to.
Okay, I think we're all back.
It's just finished, right?
Not anymore.
Yeah, I think we're all back.
Oh, is that? You asked.
Yeah, I used to use it. So when I just stay whole night to type the assignment.
Okay, we're all back. Okay, could you open your books to the thesis on CFAR-BCU? Now, before I get into this, a question was raised during the seminar, during the break, which is to kind of explain a little bit more this vacuum idea. So I just want to explain that a tiny bit more so that you get a sense of it, and then we're going to get into the thesis on CFAR-BCU, and I'll show you. I'm going to explain this vacuum thing slightly differently now. Do you think that you are able to make history? Yeah. Okay, how do people think that they are able to make history? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anybody think you're not able to make history? Don't be shy. Really? Everyone here thinks you can make history? Well, that makes me happy. You think that?
Yeah, there's yeah.
Okay, good, good. Okay, well, there are a lot of people that don't think that, all right? Anyway, in order to make history, you have to know something about this word that I'm going to put out called necessity. It's a big, heavy word. Necessity, no, there's an expression in English, necessity is the mother of invention, and so on and so forth. How do you know that what you are engaged with is necessary as opposed to frivolous and not going to work? And by frivolous, I'm not trying to insult Oscar Wilde and all things frivolous or whim. I'm saying, how do you know that the actions you're going to take are going to be effective? Because the word necessary means that you do some action and there's a reaction to it. At some point, might not be an immediate reaction. Like, for example, you do your MA and 15 years down the line, you have an aha moment and there's a connection. How do you know, when you can't see that far in the future, how do you know what you're doing is necessary? The answer that Marx comes up with, and many people that later on call themselves Marxist, is that there is, I'm going to call it determinism, but I don't mean it in this rigid sense. There is, let's say, a pattern that happens. Like if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, you know the next number is going to be 5. It's not because there's some trick I'm playing with you or that you've memorized.
My next number was 1.
Okay, you don't count them. That's no issue. I said that with love. base 10, and we say 1, 2, 3, 4, you know the next number is going to be 5, not 1. Okay, if we're in base 5, the next number is 1. Okay, so.
Sorry, no, yeah, it's just the rhythm.
Anyway, if you're in a rhythm, and the rhythm is 1, 2, 3, and the next rhythm is 1, 2, 3, then you know that if I go 1, 2, 3, we're going to start over at 1, 2, 3. That's a determination. That's a pattern. That's a logic. That is what one could, let's say, visually see as what Marx is calling an economic, let's say, agenda, an economic determinism. That is to say, you're in a situation and it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and you could go to 5, or you could go back to 1, or you could go to tree. You could go to something completely else. But in order to not go in the direction that it looks like you're going, you got to do something. You got to either be aware, you have to know what you're doing, you have to make some sort of rational. It doesn't have to be 100% rational, but it has to be relatively rational. I can tell you that in fighting the good fight for gay politics, for example, which I mentioned many times, in the 70s and 80s, well, in the 80s, in Toronto, when I was living in Toronto, when we had our first lesbian gay pride march, the women came with bags on their heads. They came with bags on their heads because they didn't want it to be seen, in case the cameras were there and they'd be fired, because that's how it was, and that's not that long ago, really, that's the 80s. Okay, now, how did we know that we were making history? Well, short answer, we didn't. We just went out there. But the more the momentum started going, the more you could see that something was happening. There's that song, something's happening in the air. I don't know how the verse goes, but it's like there's something happening. There's something. So there's this move, and this way in which is like a big ocean liner is going in a direction. To turn it around, you need to kind of know what you're doing on some level. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you kind of have to know. In order that you are not just being caught in some sort of ridiculous game of just running to keep where you are, that kind of game, you have to get a sense of what the wind is telling you, what the direction is, what the direction of history is. Now, history changes direction. It's what Leotard will call an event. When the event is going in this direction, and then it's going in that direction. History can change direction, but the question is, how does that happen? And if you can change it, if you could change direction, how would you do it? Would you do it with a bunch of people? Would you do it by smoking dope? I mean, how would you do it? Would it be like one thing you do and just run out and go do it and say, wait for the change to happen? How did it happen? So what Marx is talking about is get a hold of the bigger picture here, the macro picture. But remember, when you're getting a hold of the macro picture, that it's dirty and messy and burps and farts and has, excrement everywhere and so on and so forth. This is part of the bigger picture, but that doesn't mean there's not a rhythm. That doesn't mean there's not some sort of pattern. And if you slot in when there's a disruption in the pattern, when for some reason there's some kind of problem, either because your forebearers or, I don't know, a whole bunch of communists decide to take over the barricades, something happened and there's a break going on, that's when there's a vacuum. Now, the question becomes, what happens when there's a vacuum? Now, like I said, or like Marx said, or like Marx said, nature pours a vacuum. This is the logic behind this. So when there's this pattern, it's going like so, and now there's some other stuff happening. Now there seems to be more, collective something going on, and there's a break. There's a moment. Is it a conjunctural crisis, that is to say sort of a superficial crisis, or is it organic? Now, the state will always argue that it's conjunctural because they're running around trying to fix everything. It's like, there's like leaking roof and leaking this, and the ship's going down, and it's like, oh, it's nothing. You ever see Monty Python? When the guy's like, first he gets one leg cut off, and it's a little flesh wound, That's right, on this scratch, Now, what level is the crisis at? There's a crisis, what level is it at? That's the first question. And the next one is, who comes in to fill the gap? Because that gap, according to Marx, will always be filled by someone or something, a vacuum will not last very long. Hence the worry that's going on in the Middle East and the various things, or not just the Middle East, you know, here. Whenever there's a shift in power, there's a vacuum. Who's going to fill it? Any place you've ever worked that has a shift in management, which is at a much lower level. I mean, we're not talking about, you know, running the world. When there's a shift, there's a power vacuum. Even though the new person coming in might have a whole bunch of ways that they want to do it, if somebody else comes in, I'm sure you've worked with coworkers that sort of know how to get in there somehow, and suddenly, what do you know, they're, you know, running the show. I know that there are places in other universities, not this one, where some of the admin people actually run the university. I mean, really run the university. It's really like Yes Minister. You know, and Yes Minister, that's a very good example. There's a power vacuum. The guy who's leading doesn't really know how to lead, and there's someone that comes in and leads. Now, there's a guy named Gramsci, which I've mentioned before, Gramsci. It's not Gramsci, Gramsci, for my pet peeves. Okay, so Gramsci, who was the leader of the Italian Communist Party in the late 20s in Italy, well, Italian, he was a little guy, he's 4'9", and had spina bifida. And in fact, when he was caught by Mussolini and paraded through the streets, and people started taunting him because they didn't believe he was Gramsci, because they kept thinking that they'd never seen him, and they thought that the leader of the Communist Party had to be tall. And it was, you know, people were throwing, you're not Gramsci, you know. Bad enough you're arrested. Then the people don't even know you're Gramsci. You know, like, anyway. And Gramsci made an argument while he was in prison, and he died after he was let out, like a day after he was let out. But when he was in prison, he wrote these things called the prison notebooks, and he secreted all the papers away and put them in little crevices, and made the argument that there was no such thing as the working class. And of course, he was the head of the Communist Party, so this was a little bit of a disturbing feature, because people were coming into the prison and trying to see what did Gramsci have to say about things. And so there's a whole lot of writing that basically makes the argument that he was losing his mind, and he had been tortured, and he was losing his teeth, and he wasn't literally losing his mind. He had depression problems before he went to prison, and so on and so forth. I mean, there are a number of us that wrote books on this. I was one of them, and my argument was that he was so not losing his mind, he just realized that the people that were backing the fascist were also the working class, and that was a problem, and he was trying to understand. Gramsci's question was, how come fascism worked in some places, like landed in some places, and in other places didn't land? What is it about England, or England at the time, that fascism did not take root, whereas fascism does take root in Italy and Germany? Like, what is that about? They both have capitalism. They both have, you know, I don't know, it's the same time period. What is it about? Why did fascism, or why didn't fascism happen there? And he follows this 18th Brumaire argument. He's thinking around, how is it that some environments that are capitalist, that are in this moment of history, it's going in this direction, this profound move where what Marx argues is that under capitalism in a general sense, there's this big suck that happens in everyone, everything. It's like being in a tsunami. Everyone gets sucked into the vortex of capitalism. Doesn't matter if it's oligarchy, doesn't matter if it's feudalism, the way the tsunami happens, everyone gets sucked in and you become either bourgeois or proletariat. You either sell your labor power or you're in a position of buying the labor power. That's the big move. And that's the stage called capitalism. That stage is an economic determinism. It's economically determinate in this way. I'm talking about this kind of momentum. And Benjamin speaks about this in his thesis on history. He says the angel of history is very upset. Well, it doesn't look good. The angel is upset now. Takes Valium. Now, the angel of history is being blown backward and is looking and it's crying because they are being blown into the future but can only see the past following them, this horrible past. So it's a very sad thing. Anyway, not to depress you. So this gets back to this question of how do you understand power? don't forget, is about power, and that in turn is about how you understand this thing called reality. If you are coming from a classical liberal perspective, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I just mean what's called classical liberalism, and it would be wonderful if people read people like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, that crowd. Classical liberalism has a Newtonian concept of space and power, which is like a square. It's like it's got a frame to it. If you push one way, the power recedes, and you get flattened against the wall. If you push the other way, the other guy recedes, and you get flattened against the wall. And this is called a zero-sum game. I think I've mentioned this before. Push one way, push the other. But what if there are no walls like that? What if the real way power is established is this dialectical way, where the totality is made because of this weird movement of sublation, and getting stuck together, and creating this synthesis that comes back around and forms the ground, so that what becomes the edge of this globular moment called the dialectic is not really an edge like a frame, like this frame. It's an edge like the edge of the world. There's an edge, but it's not really an edge. On the other hand, you're not going to fall off the earth. See, with this kind of idea, there is the idea that you do fall off the earth. The flat earth. Gone. But when you think about a globe, the round part of the globe, how do you get off the earth? I mean, other than dying, of course. I mean, how do you get off the earth? You don't. You don't fall. There's no way to fall off the earth. There's no edge in that sense. You can't get through that edge. I mean, obviously, if you're in a spaceship and you go through gravity and whatnot, you can do that. So what Marx is saying is that think of the world, think of reality more like a globe rather than a square. The globe is dialectical. But when you're thinking of the power scenarios, they exist as vacuums when, let's play this, you know, I'll put it, maybe this will clarify it or maybe this won't clarify it. You know this process of sublation we were talking about in the making of the coffee, right? The coffee goes in. What if the grounds, the coffee grinds, the coffee beans did something else? Let's say it didn't go, because we know that the heat heats the water and the water goes up, and so the coffee beans are sublated into the water, or maybe the other way around, and then it creates this thing called coffee, right? But what happens if it did something completely different? That'd be weird, right? It has a logic. The logic goes in this direction. One sublates the other, not the other way around. So what Marx is saying is that there is a logic. There is a logic to how this determination goes on. And when that breaks, when that logic no longer holds, you got a vacuum. You got a problem. Can you imagine if you went to your house and you opened your refrigerator and everything was floating around in there and it wasn't water? You're just sitting there, you think, you shut the door and then you open it again, it's like, you have a problem, right? You know, there's a problem. You know, shut it, open it, okay? Same idea. Suddenly, everything's sort of swimming along, doing its thing, and then suddenly it's, well, if you're sitting there going, wow, what's going on? Somebody else goes, I like that, comes right in there, grabs it. And then everything settles down again, but this other person's holding it. You're going, what just happened? Wait a second. So what Marx is talking about is be aware of how the vacuum gets set up. It happens by a conjunctural, what happens is a very innocent looking crisis. The crisis can suddenly turn and become organic. It can suddenly break the vacuum. So you have this movement of history going in this direction. You have, let's say, Napoleon I doing this thing. Then you have the communists and the barricades, and there was bloodshed, and you have the chopping off of the, before that you have the killing of the aristocrats, and there's a lot of blood running in those rivers, in those streets. Picture the Les Mis, blood, dying, the smell, all of that. Picture all this going on. It gets to your head a little bit. You live in environments like that. that's going to destabilize. That's going to create a vacuum. And who's going to come up through that vacuum? Well, if the party that's leading, if the party that's actually in power is not able to maintain its power, then whoever comes in kind of has carte blanche for at least a little while. And as they say, a week is a long time in politics. Even if they have it for a week, it's a long time. And they can come in and do something. And his argument is that what happens in the 18th Brumaire scenario is that someone comes in, a group comes in, and if they don't have their own kind of machine, then they will end up doing the agenda of the very group that they're trying to depose. It's happened with feminism. It's happened in the civil rights movement. It happens in every single political movement that has ever happened. And that's interesting. And he's trying to show you how it happens, yes? Every single one. When it doesn't work.
Right.
You know, when there's a problem. It doesn't matter if it's left, right, center. He's making an argument. This is a logical, analytic scenario. This is like, he's very military in this. He's saying, you want to understand power? You want to understand? Let's stop being children here. Let's understand how power operates. You know, if it's a situation where it starts to get wobbly, there will be this situation that another group come in. And if that group is able to grab the thing that is at this point going like wobbly, called the state, if it's able to grab that, and they're not very good at it, then the direction that it was originally in is just going to continue. And so that group may be making lots of plans, and like the liberal Democrats, they might be saying, oh look, you know, this is what we're fighting for, we're doing it, and like, shut up, you're not doing anything. Because they don't have, for whatever reasons, they don't have the clout. They think they have the clout, but they didn't have the clout, right? Unlike with Obama, what's interesting about his case is he comes in, the Democrats aren't so strong that they are able to categorically, or let's say the Democrats, whatever, the kind of Obama scenario, because the Republicans and Democrats were at that point on his side. He's able to lead, but he can't shake the agenda. He's able to stop it from going completely right wing, but he's not able to really turn the ship around. So the best that he's doing right now is like holding the dam from completely collapsing. And there's every guess that it'll go completely nuts in the next election, because that is still going in this direction. Now, so the question becomes, how, you know, we're all members of history, right? We're all agents, social agents. How do you stop it? Or how do you do something? How do you know, A, that you should do something, that you can do something, that you will do something that will be effective? And at the same time, pay your mortgage, if you have kids, get them off to school, yeah. Complicated. It's complicated. So, I mean, as Sartre used to always say, you know, sometimes you just don't have time to be a militant. That was his whole story in Dirty Hands, if you ever read that. Sometimes it's just like, you're just trying to get through a day. You don't really have time to run off and deal with the revolution. You know, that's on Tuesday at 9:30, we used to say. That's a little joke we used to have. Anyway. Now, just to recap, so think about power being not ubiquitous in this kind of like, you know, weird, you can't put your finger on it kind of thing. You can put your finger on it. You can put your whole hand on it. You want to be in military, you want to understand how you really advance, then don't think of a field like a square. Think in guerrilla tactics. This is what Marx is saying. Think in this kind of way in which these movements happen like so. There's this movement going like this, telos, going like this. It's having a reverse effect, and at the same time, while it's doing all this kind of movement, this kind of weird movement, you have also a crack. The economy falls apart. These stupid corporations, they start to do, you know, trusts, so-called trusts. I love these words. You know, they create the trust. And they create these big, you know, and that now you had in the US in the 30s, you know, one of the major depressions happened because there were all these trusts that were going on. And all the, you know, this buying, selling, short, and all the rest of this kind of thing. You know, that was part of the capitalism, but that's capitalism gone a little rampant, like very rampant, rancid probably. Anyway, so you have the situation, and Marx is saying every group that isn't aware of how power vacuums get established are always going to lose power. You're always going to be running after yourself. So you've got to be very alert. Not paranoid, or no, let's say not overly paranoid, but just alert. And to be, the first stage of being alert is understanding that the ground of knowledge is called what?
History.
History. And that history is A, clean, B, dirty, C, neutral. Dirty. Good. Okay, so now we're getting there. Do not be afraid of the body. Do not be afraid of the senses. Get with the picture. Senses are very important. So he's making this, you know, you want to talk about materialism, and your materialism doesn't deal with the body, doesn't deal with the filth, doesn't deal with what he calls in the 11th Theses, the dirty Jewish question. Marx being Jewish, I have the right to say this on some minimal level. You're not dealing with this, you don't see what lies before you as the dirt, you're going to miss out on the pearl. It's not complex. You've got to pay attention. And that view is part of the whole movement in art, of having dirt in your art. Think about the two different types of art. Art history. Those who love art historians is very neat. Is very much this seeing as a vessel of either God or trying to be very representative, versus the messy, the Slavs, you know, this kind of crazy kind of stuff. They're very different conceptions of art, and they have very different ramifications politically. So, tonight, we finally move into the thesis on the quarterback, so you can actually hear it and read it. You're going to see, I hope the ground has been laid now. First of all, that there is a ground, and the ground is called history. So history has a materiality, but it's not like you can go out and grab history. You know, like, you know, that looks interesting. I like 1847. You know, it's not that kind of material. It still has a fabric. It's a weird fabric. It's the fabric that doesn't shape the outside, it shapes the core. That creates the expansion, however expanded you're going to get with your dialectic. So you picture the dialectic unfolding, or anyway, going in this direction, and then something gets it off track, and there's an 18th Brumaire situation. Gramsci has a name for a more complicated version of this, which is hegemony, which I'm sure you've heard this word. Have you heard this word, hegemony?
Yeah.
H-E-G-E, or some people call it hegemony, again, wrong. Hegemony, H-E-G-E-M-O-N-Y. And hegemony is dealing with who leads when you have a bunch of leaders. When you have a bunch of leaders, like you're all leaders really. You have a bunch of leaders in this group. Who's leading? You've been in groups where somebody just seems to organize, you know, and it's kind of like, who gave you the right to organize? Nobody. They just started organizing. That's how hegemony, and hegemony operates by a tacit consent. That everybody in the group tacitly consents. Sometimes they overtly consent, but usually it's tacit, and there's always an underbelly of violence. So there's an overt, wonderful human being, but if you don't listen to me, there'll be trouble. That's how hegemony operates. So America is like hegemonic in the West, A, because everybody tacitly is agreeing, and B, because if they don't, they might be bombed by the U.S. There's a violence. And this is very traditional in political studies. This notion of how violence comes in to organize quietly. Because if you sat around and put a gun to everybody's head, it'd be exhausting, it'd cost too much money, who could you trust in the end? If everybody has guns, and everybody's, you know, like, you know, it's like, it's difficult. So it's much better to rule by consent, this little sort of threat moment happening in the corner. That's how hegemony operates. And now, and also, what forms the West, for example? Where does Israel form? Where does Israel sit? Is Israel West, or East, or South? What's Israel? So where's Israel in this thing? West. Where's China? East. Where's Russia?
Oh, all over the place.
No, yeah, that's right. So you notice that once you sort of get out of China and America and the West, this thing called the West, what happened to the other countries? They just sort of, where did they go? Where's Greece? That's always a good one. Poor little Greece. You know, if you want to love Greece, it's kind of, Greece is very much like, you know, the whole feminine, female thing with the, as the leading symbol of freedom for the French Revolution. Of course, women had a terrible scenario. So you can love the woman up high on this pedestal, like Greece gets loved on high as a pedestal, but if you actually deal with it, you know, Greece, the founding country of democracy, is like, well, whatever, the Greeks, you know, this kind of thing. Like, where are they, the East or West? Well, let's see, they're the founding of Western democracy, and they don't seem to be able to hang on to their currency. Let's think why. Oh, they're getting sucked out. Sucked out. There's a vacuum in Greece. What's going to happen? Obviously, there was an attempt for the Sun Ra party, or whatever they call themselves, to kind of move in, fascist party. That's happening all over Europe. These vacuums, you get parties coming in. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm just saying that you need to get a sense of how this power operates and why the Hegelian move is so irritating for people who are Marxist on some level or another. What's your question? Would you like to turn to this now? Would you like to turn to the 11 Theses, or do you have questions? Millie, you look ill. Are you sure?
Yeah. Can I ask what the grammar actually means? What is
Brumaire?
Yeah.
It means an opening. It's actually a month. Doesn't you speak French?
Yeah, I speak French, but what is it literally?
Is it what the 10 months that
Yeah.
Napoleon invented?
Yeah,
Change
that's
the calendar.
yeah, that's right. He's
Because
trying to
it's
change
not-
the calendar. That's right.
Right, so that's what it is. It's an invented month. Right, okay, cool, thank you.
Somebody else that was in cell groups. Excellent. Yeah. Any other questions? Sure. Okay.
With our essay questions, does all the stuff you've said about the dirt and everything, so would that like feed into the questions?
Yes. Okay. Are we on the 11 Theses? Do you have them in front of you? Okay. Andre, since you've got it set up, could you read number 1? Can you read German?
No, but I can kind of figure out German words, but I can do here and stuff.
Okay, good. Oh, for example. Okay, go on.
The main defect of
Now, I gotta read it like you mean it.
the
You gotta
main
read it like your Marx. He was young, he didn't have a beard
main defect of all hitherto existing materialism, that of Feuerbach included, is that of the object, the Gegenstand, actuality, sensuousness, are conceived only in the form of the object, or in the contemplation, Anschauung, I'm not sure about that one, but not as human sensuous activity, practice.
or praxis.
Yeah, practices. Not subjectively.
Okay, stop right there. Okay. The main defect of all hitherto existing materialism, this is quite the sentence, that of Feuerbach included, is that the object, capital O object, the concept of the object, actuality, sensuousness, are conceived only in the form of a little object, an abstract notion of object, or contemplation, Ausschwung, I guess I did it, but not as human sensuous activity, or what's called praxis.
objective side, in opposition to materialism, was developed by idealism, but only abstractly. Since, of course, idealism does not know real sensuous activity as such. Feuerbach wants sensuous objects, Objekte, differentiated from thought objects, but he does not conceive human activity itself as objective, gegenständliche activity. In the essence of Christianity,
Skip that bit.
he therefore regards the theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, while practice is conceived and defined only in its dirty Jewish form of appearance. Hence, he does not grasp the significance of the revolutionary, of the practical critical activity.
What does that mean? He therefore regards the theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, whilst practice is conceived and defined only in its dirty Jewish form of appearance. Hence, he does not grasp the significance of revolutionary, of practical critical activity. And so, in case you have noticed, have you ever heard of this thing called critical theory? That's where this comes from. So now you know. These are all code words that slip into the universities so that they're able to be taught. So what does this mean? How is this critiquing materialism? Or why is idealism taking such a bash for this? What is the problem?
Because it's separated from humanity. It's
So-
separated from everyday life, in whatever form it eats, and he calls it dirty Judaical manifestation. Because all life is sensuous. We move, we get up, we breathe. So it's all senses, isn't it? While Feuerbach and his ilk only think in metaphysical forms. Humans are not people, humans are ideas.
Humans are ideas, yeah. Okay? Mark, how are you handling this?
Only works in theory, not in practice.
Is what you think he's saying?
In a certain sort of way, and it comes into appearance. So it completely misses out the idea of human practice.
Okay, and what is human practice?
Human practice is in relation to the idealistic term and the materialistic term, the traditional materialistic term, is, well, I'm really simplifying my brainstorm with that
That's
great
right.
today. But so what is practice is what you're asking me.
And what does it mean to be sensuous here? What's he saying here? Why is that? Why is he putting this as the most important thing? Number one point: understand the sensuous, or immerse yourself in the sensuous. He's not even asking you to understand it. He's just asking you to what?
No.
I think it's sex actually, but
Well, it could be sex. Did you say sex?
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it because it creates the ground?
Because the
Yes.
this,
But how does it create the ground?
Immediate. It's not mediated.
It's immediate. Yay! Very good. So rather than the is, very good. That gave me chills. Also, I'm getting ill again. But that is excellent because I was hoping that someone would get this because, with Hegel, he starts with the is. That's the immediate, that's the non-mediated. For Marx, it's the sensuous that's the non-mediated. Don't start with this thing called the is. Not because it's not real, but because its realness is always first and foremost sensuous. So you start there. That's where you start. So it's a little bit of a red herring. If you buy that one little Trojan horse that Hegel does, which is we start right here, right now, you're in it, and you're caught for life. He got you on the hook. What Marx is saying is that, don't go to the is. The way he's posing the notion of is contemplative only. It's an idea. The is only ever sensuous. The immediate is the sensuous. Very good. Buy her a beer. Do you drink beer? Yeah, buy her a beer. Okay, 2. So why don't you read 2?
The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question.
Okay, read it again.
The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. Man must prove the truth, i.e. the reality and power, the this-sidedness of his thinking in practice. The dispute over the reality or non-reality of thinking that is isolated from practice is a purely scholastic question.
How do you understand that? You know, it's funny, I'm always thrilled when I read this. Quite sad, really. I think this is remarkable work. What do you hear when you, I mean, obviously I hear lots of things. I hear the fairies speaking to me. What do you hear? The question of whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking or not is not a question of theory. It's not a question of God. It's not a question of not within humans' reach.
It's Cartesian.
Yeah, it's a practical question.
Same philosophy is not enough.
It's not enough.
No.
It may not even be necessary. It may not be even barely.
It's academic.
It's academic.
Yeah.
Sport. The practical is when you learn that in order to think, you must immerse yourself first and foremost in the sensuous. That you must prove the truth, the so-called the this-sidedness thinking in practice. Thinking cannot be taken away from practice.
You have to move from thought to action, sort of saying that
No.
thought's not enough, it's just
No, it's not so much you have to move from thought to action, it's that you can't have thought unless it's in the practice.
yeah.
Thought doesn't exist by itself. And by the way, neither does practice.
They're
The-
symbiotic, yeah.
They're not just symbiotic, it's like breathing. You wouldn't say that breathing exists outside of air. The act of breathing is also the taking in of air. So it's the same idea. Thinking doesn't exist outside of this other thing called practice. It,
Preempts.
what?
They preempts each other.
No, no, it's not like one comes first and then the next one, or one comes on one side and then the other side. It's that they are not separable. That's why it's called praxis. So another way of putting this is, let's talk about it in terms of, maybe terms you'll understand, which is 0 and 1. Oh, back on safe ground. Okay, 0 and 1 is a computing algorithm. You could have a 0, and you could have a 1, but they're just not meaning anything. Once you have 0 and 1, you have the moment where something can happen.
So they're defining each other by presence or absence of the other.
No, I didn't explain it well. I did not explain it well. Okay, so, no. Immersive, it's like physical thinking. There is no thinking outside of the physical. There's no consciousness that's floating around, so all you people that might believe that there's a consciousness floating around, you're not going to like this part. Okay? The consciousness, the knowing is bodily.
So thought
Once-
is a part cannot exist without brain, and brain is a physical object inside the skull, attached to a human being.
Well, to put it slightly differently, the brain cannot think outside of history. Forget about the body. The brain is brainless without history. Now, you may not like this argument. You gotta understand that's what the argument is. You may go, I didn't want this to be part of Marx. It is. Deal with it. Try and see what is being said. Why is it that you can't separate? What is it about the argument he's saying that you can't separate, so I can color does. Okay. Who wants to read the next one? Natalia, why don't you read the next one?
Which one?
The 3.
No, which Italian?
Oh, I see. You can do it.
Slightly different variant
What?
of translation point.
Okay, that's right.
The materialist doctrine concerning the changing of circumstances and upbringing forgets that circumstances are changed by man, and that it is essential to educate himself. This doctrine must, therefore, divide society into 2 parts, one of which is superior to society. The coincidence of the changing of circumstances and of human activity, or self-changing, can be conceived and rationally understood only as a revolutionary practice.
Okay, I'm going to read out. Does anybody have a different version of that?
Yes.
Okay, can you, Sophie, can you read a different version? Because I mean that is a bad translation actually. 'Cause
Yeah, it's really different in this.
Okay,
The materialistic doctrine that men are
no,
products.
the materialist.
Oh, sure. Sorry. The materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed men are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringing.
Okay, so that's the materialist position. The materialist doctrine that states that men and women are products of circumstance and upbringing. This is like tragic sociology. The position that, which used to be called the materialist doctrine, that people are products of circumstance and upbringing, and therefore that changed men are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringing. Does what?
Forgets that it is men who change circumstances, and that the educator must himself be educated. Hence, this doctrine is bound.
Hence this doctrine meaning the materialist doctrine. That's what wasn't clear in your translation, yeah.
Hence, this doctrine is bound to divide society into 2 parts, one of which is superior to society. The coincidence of the change of circumstances and of human activity or self-change can be conceived and rationally understood only as revolutionary practice.
So, why does the materialist doctrine divide society? Why does he say, hence the materialist doctrine is bound to divide? If you believe that that men are products of circumstance and upbringing, and that therefore changed people are products of changed circumstances and changed upbringings, that it forgets the fact that it's people who do the changing, that it's not the circumstances that do the changing. So another expression in drama was always, don't blame your tools. It's an old expression. The materialist doctrine that says that people are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed people are products of changed circumstances, like the technology, or driving a car, forgets that it is people who change the circumstances, and that therefore the educator must him or herself be educated. Hence, the materialist doctrine, the Feuerbachian doctrine, is bound to divide society into 2 parts. Why? Why does it, can you think, why does that follow? What does that line follow? If you agree, if you take the Feuerbachian line that says the materialist doctrine that men are products of circumstances and upbringing, and that therefore changed men are products of changed, why does that divide the society into?
Because it's predeterminate, isn't it? It's saying that people can't change.
No, it's saying that people are changed, that changed men are products of changed circumstances.
But they have a predeterminism which...
Does it suggest the direction of change?
No.
There is this group of people who suddenly are a product of different circumstances. Where are these circumstances from?
Oh,
So they-
went off
they-
trail,
they-
went off
they-
trail,
they-
cold.
Okay.
Okay, you're almost there. Okay, there are people that have changed circumstances. So,
Who
any-
chooses what's going to be changed? or
no,
how?
cold.
Who's the power? Who's got
Warmer.
the power to change people? Or
Okay, here's a Punch and Judy cartoon that had this guy in a beautiful house, on a beautiful bed, and this very poor person came in this cartoon and said, how can you live like this, in this bed, on this linen, when people are starving all around you? And his answer is, because I live like this, in a beautiful house, you know, with a beautiful wife, and a beautiful bed, and then suddenly we're into a song. Anyway, now, do you see that people who are able to, let's say, class jump, and go from, let's having nothing to something, or those people that had never class jumped, but they're always in the aristocratic field, think that they deserve it, think that they're better. This is where this is coming from. This is saying, the materialist doctrine says that people who believe that human beings are products of circumstance, and therefore the West is better, because the West has better roads, better this, better that, and the third world are crap, because they don't have the same kind of thing. Forget that it is people who did the change, not the circumstances as such. Obviously, if you have nothing to eat, you're starving to death, your circumstance is going to be important. But that's not what's going to change you. That's not what's going to make you revolutionary.
But that's what I meant by predetermined, because some people are born into privilege. That's what it's talking about, is that they like you said, they think that they are due this privilege.
Yeah.
And people say, but I've worked hard all my life. It's like, no, you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth.
But
so
let's say those people that weren't born with the famous silver spoon, but, or as they used to say about Boris Johnson, he was born with a silver foot in his mouth, which I thought was very funny. Anyway, but let's say the people that, you know, have made it on their own, they're self-made people, you know, they were born in, I don't know, ghetto in the trash heap, and then they made another multimillionaire or something like that, like David Beckham or something, or whatever, I mean, this kind of thing. Now, maybe he thinks he deserves it. That's right. I deserve it! Okay. Maybe that's the guard. Maybe there's a big fight going on outside. Okay. Maybe he wants us to leave. Anyway, that the coincidence of changing circumstances of human activity or self-change can be conceived, so the coincidence of changing circumstances and of human activity, so that they have to come together, it's not one over the other, that's when you realize you're on the path to being revolutionary. That's what he's saying is revolutionary. You can't have one without the other, but to just have the changing of circumstances ain't gonna change the map. Go a little faster. Okay, let's skip over to, okay, number 7. Feuerbach consequently does not see that the religious sentiment is itself a social product, and that the abstract individual that he analyzes belongs in reality to a particular social form. So this is where he's getting into the question that objective has something to it, has something like the oyster has, a little bit of dirt. All social life is essentially practical. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice and in the comprehension of this practice. Hence the basis of Murder, She Wrote, for example, who is always able to know that murders happen not because of ghosts or not because of this or that, but because human beings are doing it. I happen to like Murder, She
Take
Wrote.
on TV.
Yes, that's right. Daytime TV, that's right. Love it. Number 10, the standpoint of old materialism is civil society. The standpoint of what Marxism, or this is what he's calling about, the standpoint of the new is human society, or social humanity, It's understanding how the human stops being this individual thing and becomes the social being. 11, the famous one, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And now we must go. We're gonna get in trouble. Okay, next week I'll hand back your things, or I hope I'll be able to just email them to you, so you can look at them. That's the whole point of, so I have comments on them.